what is logic? And more importantly, why is it something that you might want to do? And most importantly, why would you want to hear about it from me? Hello, my name is Chico. You may know me from my YouTube channel, The Philosopher. If not, if this is your first introduction, I've taught philosophy and logic for about 11 years now. I've teaching for a long time, and I really love the subject. I thought that I would start off with an introduction on what it's about, so you can see whether it's something that's for you or not. And then I'm going to have a bunch of different classes all on logic, on different kinds of logic. So first, I thought I'll start off with a scenario that's going to help us to understand what logic is. Imagine you get your dream job, right? Or let's say instead, maybe not a dream job, but you get an internship at the place where you want to get your dream job. So you're starting off at the bottom, right? And you're trying to work your way up. You got to impress that boss. And day one, the boss says to you, "All right, we've got some menial tasks for you, unfortunately, just to start off, right? Because you're building your way up. And we have these forms that we have to fill out. And employees have filled out some of these forms, and customers have filled out some of these forms. The weird thing is, on the back side of these forms, there are numbers, right? And the employees' forms have to be even numbers. So we have to go through the stack and make sure that if it's an employee that is filled out of the form, then it is an even numbered form, right? So, it's on the back, so you're going to have to flip it over. And, there's a lot of these things, so you're going to have to take a long time to do so. And the boss says, unfortunately, we had 2 interns before you, right? And they were trying to figure this thing all out. And I explained it to them, and then they just, they didn't really communicate well. One person had stacked, he had filtered through the forms and stacked them so you had employees in one stack and customers in another stack. The other guy stacked them up so you had even numbers forms in one stack and odd number forms in another stack. And we're going to have to go through these things, and we're going to have to figure out if it's an employee, we got to make sure it's an even numbered form. Now, you want to impress everybody, so you want to get this job done quickly, or maybe you're just like me and you're lazy and you just want to figure out what is the easiest way out of this, right? Especially in my old age, man. I got to find like the quickest route so that I don't have to expend extra energy, right? So which ones would you choose to make sure, which ones would you check to make sure that this rule has been followed? Interestingly enough, you don't have to check all of the stacks. You only have to check at least one, maybe several. But which ones would you choose? Well, if you said the employee stack, of course, that makes a lot of sense, right? If it's an employee form, then you check the back to make sure that it's an odd number on the backside, or an even number on the backside. Now, you have the customer forms. Would you check those forms? Well, no, because remember what our rule was. If it's an employee, then it needs to be an even number form. The customer, we didn't have any rule at all about. If it's a customer, it has to be an odd number or an even. It could be whatever it wants. We don't have to check that form. So there's a whole stack you don't have to check, right? Logic's already helping us out. I'm looking at this forms. I've checked those forms. Now I have 2 more stacks. I have the even number stack and the odd number stack. Which one would you choose? Would you pick either one of them? If you said you would check the even number, which is 80 to 90% of college students chose that. If it's an employee, then it better be an even number. It sounds right, but it's actually wrong. Remember, we don't care if the customer has used an even number or an odd number. So if I flip it over and see even number customer, great. If I flip it over even number employee, great, right? Doesn't matter. But now think about the odd one, right? When I look at the odd stack, if I flip it over and it has a employee on it, then I know the rule has been violated. We have an employee, but we don't have an even number. This is a logical fallacy. It is one that is really easy to make. And if we hadn't studied logic, we would have checked the whole wrong, stack of forms, and we would have done a poor job, right? I mean, we could have had some of these forms that slipped through that were wrong, bam, you don't get your dream job. Logic has a lot of different definitions that are hotly contested in the philosophy world. And so, one cool thing about the classes that I'm going to give is that I'm a philosopher as well as a logician. So I can kind of explain to you what is the nature of logic and some of the debates on the nature of logic. Whereas, if we were just doing logic, we would figure out what it was, we would figure out how to do it, but we may not understand like what it is we're exactly doing. There are a lot of hotly contested definitions for logic. I'm going to give you one that I liked, that logic is the science of truth. And by science, I don't mean, empirical science, of course. I mean systematic study of truth. But what I mean by that is that some statements that are true they have some kind of structure to them, right? And they have parts to them. And given those parts, if the statement is true, then you can figure out other statements that are true using some of those parts, right? And it can be in bizarre ways, such as our example, right? So our example is something like this. If E, employee, right, then let's say V for even number, right? If E, then V. And then we look at the E pile to make sure that there are V's, right? Even numbers on the back. The employee pile to see that there are even numbers on the back. And when we're looking at that same structure, if employee, then even numbers, and it's not an even number, now we look and make sure that it's not an employee, right? So we can know how some true statements will engender other true statements just based on logic. And this is a specific kind of logic that we're using, by the way. This is deductive logic, and I'll have an additional video to explain to you, like, just very briefly what some other kinds of logic might be. But when I say logic in this class, we're going to be using it to mean deductive logic, and possibly I'll even give some additional classes on different kinds of logic. So that is a brief description of what logic is. And it's also the first reason why we might want to do logic, practical reasoning. There are some tasks that we're going to have to reason out how to do them ahead of time, and there'll be no way to do that without knowing our logic. However, practical reasoning is not the only kind that's important to us. We also have what some ancient philosophers have called speculative reasoning, or theoretical reasoning, maybe. There's some theoretical stuff that's important to us. For us, it's important to know stuff in science. Politics is very important for humans. Religion, all of these different things proceed oftentimes through reasoning, right? Not purely reasoning in some sense, in some cases, right? Science does a lot of observation. Religion has a lot of faith. Politics has a lot of maybe guesswork or something like that. But there's going to be some reasoning somewhere in there. And again, good reason to have a philosopher teach you this stuff. I am going to do my best to make these classes important to you by showing you different reasonings that happen in these different subjects, and I'm going to do my best to do it in an objective and neutral way. Right? I have seen some logic classes that they're helpful, and then they show you some political reasoning and some religious and some scientific, but what they're not good about doing is not taking a stand. My goal here is to help you to understand and to motivate you, right, to understand, not necessarily to give you my perspective, although a lot of times it's going to be impossible for me not to have any perspective whatsoever. But I'm going to do my best to teach this class to help you to understand. And it's important for us that we reason well in these. First of all, I think it's important for everybody. We want to know that the reasons we believe these things in these different subjects are legitimate reasons, right? That we're not just convincing ourselves of things. We also don't want to be embarrassed when we're talking to somebody else and they point out a logical fallacy in our beliefs, right? In these subjects, they tend to be close to us, and we don't like that kind of a thing. Also, I think we want to be convincing to others. When you're talking about religion or politics or science, Not necessarily that you want to go out there and make the world believe what you believe, but at the least, like when you're talking to people, you want to be convincing, right? You don't want to be just, a joke in these different areas. So these are important things to us as humans. Logic is going to help us to come to a better understanding of these things and why we believe what we believe in these different subjects. For example, let me give you some of the same kinds of reasonings that we had in this last example of the dream job. So in politics, right? And again, I'm going to give you like arguments on both sides here, just so you can see like, how reasoning can work in and how we can make logical fallacies, even if you're on the correct side or whatever. In politics, if gun laws were effective, there wouldn't be any school shootings. The school shootings have stopped, therefore our gun laws must be effective. That's a logical fallacy. It sounds convincing, right? Here's one on the other side. If we don't make laws banning guns, the school shootings won't stop. And the school shootings haven't stopped, so we must not have made laws banning guns. Again, this is a logical fallacy. Which logical fallacy is it? I'm not going to tell you just yet. All right, got to take the course. Here's one in religion. If you might say, let's say a religious person is talking to an irreligious person or a non-religious person, and say that person says to you, "Hey, you said that if I were to see miracles, I should believe in God, but you're saying that I should believe in God, so you must think that I've seen miracles." That's a logical fallacy. Here's another one. If God exists, then the Bible would be historically reliable, but the Bible is historically reliable. Therefore, God must exist. Again, another logical fallacy, right? Here's one in science. If it's gold, then it's yellow and shiny, but pyrite is yellow and shiny, therefore pyrite is gold. Or if you smoke, you'll get cancer, but I don't smoke, so I can't get cancer. So all of these are different fallacies that we're going to be covering. They sound convincing, but there's something wrong with them. A final reason that we might want to a final reason that I'm going to give you that you might want to do logic. Logic is absolutely essential in 3 subjects. And if you're involved in any of these subjects, then you're going to have to know logic. There are other subjects where it's important, but the actual sit down, study, and know this stuff in a technical way, is important for computer scientists, for mathematicians, and for philosophers. These 3 people have got to know logic. So let me give you an example in computer science, and then we'll call it a day. Let's say you are programming an ATM machine, and you program the ATM machine. You say, if the person has sufficient funds, then give them the money, right? Well, what happens if the person does not have sufficient funds? Well, you haven't told the ATM what to do, right? The ATM doesn't know what to do, so the ATM maybe does give them money, and you might think, but no, but my rule said if sufficient funds, then give them the money. True, but it didn't say what happens if not sufficient funds, right? And a computer is going to do just what you tell it. So it can't sit there and say, well, they probably meant so only in the case of sufficient funds, right? The computer doesn't know those kinds of things, so the computer is going to give out that money, and it's going to be your fault. So logic is pivotal in computer science. Also, mathematicians are very interested in proving the things that they believe. I don't know if you believe me, but there are different kinds of maths, and they all stem from what is the logical consequences of changing some of the rules. And in philosophy, you have nothing but reasoning to go on. Like we can't. We do start with empirical observations about the world and what science gives us and stuff like that. But then a lot of the things that you reason about in philosophy, you don't have access to in a directly empirical, testable way. So you have to reason through a lot of these things using logic alone. Logic in that case, in philosophy, logic is a lot like math is to physics, right? It is sort of the language of the subject. All right, to review really quickly, deductive logic is the science of truth, meaning the systematic study of truth. Given the truths of certain things, what can we deduce from those? Why learn it? Number one, practical reasoning. You're gonna have some tasks in your life that logic is going to be necessary for. Speculative reasonings. We want to know logic because it's going to help us to think about science and religion and politics and things that are important to us. And finally, if you're going to be in computer science, if you're going to be in philosophy, if you're going to be a mathematician, hey man, you're going to have to learn this stuff. So you may as well learn it from a person that knows it, and that would be me. So yeah, please subscribe to the Philosopher channel if you haven't already, and check out some of my new logic videos and some of the classes that we're going to have. That's all I got. Adios.